Okay, so it's time for us to now add in some materials to our world. I'm going to be adding materials to this previs model of the visitor center, because if we click on it, you can see that we have these 14, from 0 to 13 there. We have 14 materials ready to go that are in previs form, so they're just solid colors at the moment, and we're going to add some detail to them. So the one I'm going to show you today is adding detail to the main walls. So if you double click on the material that you have assigned to your 3D model, then it should load up this editor. This is the material editor. So just to take you through what's in the editor at the moment, I'm actually going to remove the original color node there, just so we can take you through right from the beginning. So our main material attributes node here has everything we're going to be using to create the material. So just to take you through what everything is, base color is obviously where you can add in a texture or a solid color to give the look of the material itself. Metallic is going to be a way to make something look more or less like a metal. Specular and roughness are to do with the glossy, shiny, or matte look of the object, and they both have their independent uses. We're going to be using roughness today for the surfaces that we use. Next one we might use is looking at emissive color, and that's how you make something produce light or glow, but probably not going to be using that today. And then the normal is how you add in that sort of fake 3D height element to it to keep your poly count down. So sometimes when you create a 3D model, you don't want to edit in every single bit of sort of the bumps, or the nooks, crannies, that sort of thing. You might add those in using a normal map, particularly if you're doing something like grass, just because that makes it look more realistic straight away. So that's how we're going to do that. And then the final one we're going to be using is the ambient occlusion. That's just helping find those edges of the materials and stuff like that. So that's really, really useful to have all of those in one nice place to attach our nodes to. Now, it's important to note we are creating a material using textures. So a texture is a PNG or a JPEG of a surface, and you combine textures together to make a material. So if I say texture, I'm talking about a 2D image. If I'm talking about a material, I'm talking about a whole collection of textures together. Okay, so I've gone ahead and downloaded some assets from Quixel Bridge. So Quixel obviously have their surfaces, so I've gone for concrete, and from the concrete menu I've gone into surfaces, and then I clicked on concrete, and then I went to painted, and then I just chose one of these white ones. I can't, there you go, it's the one with the green tick. Clicked on that, and then I pressed the download button, and then when the blue add button turned up, press that and it adds it into the project for us. So go ahead and find a texture, already getting it wrong. Make sure you find a texture that you want to download and add into your material. So I'm just going to use the concrete wall to begin with, because it's sort of similar to what we need for the film. Now, we're going to be able to change the color of the material later on, and it's going to help that this one is white. Don't worry, if you're making grass or something like that, you can still change the color of the grass. It's exactly the same process. It's just always easier when the beginning texture is white, because you're just adding color to that. So find a surface that you like in Quixel Bridge, click download, and then click add when you can, and then we can bring it into our material. But first of all, I'm just going to quickly show you how to use sort of the inbuilt nodes with the material attributes. So starting from the top, to add a base color, you can press 3 and click, and this just adds in a color node. So the default is black, so when we plug that in, we shouldn't see any difference here. But if you double click, you get your color wheel, and then you can change whatever color you want it to be. So I'm just going to change it to a bright red. There we go. We now have a bright red. Okay. So I'm actually going to set this to white to show off the metallic. So metallic is a sort of works on a slider from 0 to 1, and 0 being not very metallic, 1 being very metallic. So if you want something to be a metal, set it to 1 or somewhere close to 1, and if not, set it to 0 or somewhere close to 0. Okay, and to do that, we just add in what's called a constant node. So that's 1 and click, and that'll add in a constant node with a basic value of 0. So this won't look like a metal at all. But if we change that to 1, it will give this slightly metallic feel to it. But because we haven't changed the roughness yet, it's sort of this weird brushed metal look. So to make this look like a proper shiny metal, we're going to need to add in some roughness. So to do that, again, press 1 and click. So we get a constant node, and then when we connect that up to roughness, what we should get is a chrome look. There we go, nice chrome ball there. And you can see the reflections of the example background there. And again, if we turn this up, it will start being, whoops, it's a slider of 0 to 1, so make sure you don't go past either end like I just did. And as we decrease this value, you should notice it gets slightly more shiny the lower we go, until we get to something which looks like a completely chrome ball. Cool. So because these are working on basically what's a color and just an individual channel of color here, you can actually use textures for all of these, and that's what we're going to do today. So we're going to remove those because we don't need them, and we're going to have a look at the item drawer, the content drawer in the Megascans folder under surfaces. Painted concrete is where mine is, and you can see we have 4 things here. Now this hasn't loaded, but this should be a concrete ball because it always comes with a downloaded material with all of these set up for you, ready to go. But we're going to be creating a custom material, so we just want the 3 textures here. So we have the diffuse, which is _D, we have the normal, which is _N, and then we have the ORD, which stands for the ambient occlusion, or just occlusion, the roughness, and then also the diffuse, although sometimes that is displacement. But because we already have this diffuse, we're not going to bother with the last slot on the ORD. We're just going to use the O and the R. So we can shift click these and drag them into the material editor, and then just layer them up so that we can see what everything is. So this is actually the ORD, I believe. Yeah, ORD, and we're going to need that on the top. There we go. So I always try to order everything in the same order, just so that when I'm flicking through my different materials, I know exactly where everything's going to be. So I've gone for the base color diffuse texture on top, the normal, and then the ORD on the bottom. And the way these hook up is they're sort of like spaghetti string things, and you just click from one connector to the other, and then they should latch in. So that goes to base color, and you can see the material is already updated. This one goes to normal, and we're using the RGB slots for these top 2. But for this one, because we are using the ORD, the way the ORD stores the data is that the ambient occlusion and roughness maps are grayscale, so it means you can actually compress these textures to be on one color using, one image using a color channel for each texture. So the ambient occlusion is on the R slot, the roughness is on the green. So we're only going to be wanting to use the R and G. So we can drag out R to ambient occlusion and drag out G to roughness. And now what we have is a concrete ball, which is great. So we can click save. And because this is already connected to the 3D model in the material menu in the details, it will automatically update the material on our model. But hopefully you have noticed that the material itself isn't looking great, and that's because the size of it is incorrect. Now it's important to note, when you download a texture from Quixel, it will tell you the size of it. It'll either be 1x1, 2x2, 1x2, or 2x4, I think are the different sizes at the moment. And it's important just to take note of what that is, so you know how this is going to work with the scaling particularly if you're creating something like a landscape, because landscapes are large, and so it's important to know how you need to tile things. Obviously, a 1x1 texture is going to tile differently to a 2x2 because it's already twice as large. It doesn't mean that a 2x2 texture is more zoomed in. It generally means that it's more zoomed out. And generally, the larger the texture, the better. Although you may lose some detail the more zoomed out you are. Okay, so just bear that in mind. But we're going to want to change the tiling of this. So first of all, we need the U and click node, which is called the texture coordinate node. And this is how we're going to sort of change where everything is positioned. But we need to couple this with a sort of value. So we're going to use a constant vector, a constant value of like what we were using for the metallic and roughness earlier. So 1 and click. And then to combine these together, we're going to need a multiply node. So M and click. And then you can just drag these two together to combine them together. Okay. Now, it is important to know that if you forget the shortcuts, which will happen, just right click and then search for whatever you want. So I could search for the texture coordinate here, and then I get exactly the same node that I already have. Okay. We're actually going to leave the texture coordinate as a 1x1, just because that works with the values that we're working with. But we're going to set the value of the constant to 1. Otherwise, it will just make a blank texture, which we don't want. And then we're going to plug in the multiply into the UVs. And this is going to tell Unreal that we want to change the scale of this. But I can change the number in the box here, and the material does change, but it doesn't change on the model. And this is because we haven't clicked apply or save. But that's a really slow way to change the scale. It would be really useful to be able to see this in real time. So what we need to do is actually create what's called a material instance. And what that does is it creates a version or an instance, hence the name, of the material. And it allows us to sort of preload the information and then just change the certain values that we have asked it to be able to change. So we need to tell Unreal that we want to be able to change the tiling. So we need to convert this original node to a parameter. So we're going to right click on it and click convert to parameter and give it a name. So I'm just going to call it tiling. Now, if I had lots and lots of these nodes called tiling, there we go. So let's pretend I had several different materials, or I'm just going to plug these into each of these. Let's pretend these are all different. The way Unreal loads its instances, you would only see in the material instance one tiling value. If you wanted to see 3 tiling values, one for each node, you need to make sure that they have different names. So they cannot have the same name as a already existing parameter. So if you accidentally forget that and you're missing a node, just have a look at the names of them. And to change names is really, really easy. Just click on them, press F2, and then you can just give it a name that is different to something else. Okay, but I'm just going to keep it with the 1 because that's all I need at the moment. And we're going to click Save. Now we need to create our material instance, so I'm just going to minimize the walls. But I need to load up where the file is saved for the wall. So I'm going to click on the Browse to Main Wall in Content Drawer button, and it will show me exactly where my material is. Right click on that and click Create Material Instance. Just going to leave it with the base name. You can change this if you want. And then make sure that it's selected, so it needs that blue outline. And we're then going to click the Use Selected Asset from Content Drawer button, which is this circle with an arrow in it. And nothing should change other than this material here. You should see it says Create Dynamic Material. And what this means is we have now loaded the material instance onto the 3D model. So if you double click on this, you should see that this does not look like the material editor. It's very different. But we do have something called tiling over here, but I can't change this at the moment. That's because we need to check the box to say that's what we're changing. And now, if you look at the wall over here, as I change the slider, you should see that the material is getting bigger or smaller depending on which way I put the tile. So the smaller you make the number, the larger the texture is. So this is getting very, very big and blurry, which we don't want. We want lots of nice detail in our walls, so you need to find the value which suits the needs of your model. I was playing around with this earlier, and 15 works roughly for what I wanted to do. Then you can click save and close out of that. And you can see there's a few cracks here which don't really work, but for the most part, this is working quite nicely. Okay? And that's how you change your textures and create a texture as well. It's just a basic texture that you can use there. Now some other nodes that we might use, I'm just going to load up the door. Other nodes you might use are the power node. So to get the power node is not P and click, that creates what's called the panner node. And that's how you make a material move, but you search for power. And what this is it's, if you imagine from a mathematical sense, it's the to the power of, which means it will make values greater or smaller depending on what you ask it to put it to the power of, so squared or cubed, that sort of thing. And what this allows you to do is to change the, or its main use is to change the black and white values of a black and white texture that you're inputting. So when you put something through a power node and it's black and white, if you were to square or to a power of 2, you see here it says constant exponent. The exponent is what you're putting it to the power of. So a value of 2 would make the white point whiter and the dark darker. So you're effectively changing the contrast. It's one way to be able to change the value of a black and white node. Now this is where it's useful to have a material instance, because you could hook up this black and white value to the base color. Let's pretend this is a black and white thing, and then hook that up to base color. And then to change the exponent, you'd need a scalar value, so you can press S and click, and then it allows you to give it a name straight away. So I'm just going to call this exponent, and then when you plug this in and give this a value of 1, it gives you what it was looking like originally. Press 2, you can see it's making, it's actually making it slightly more red. Go to 5, making it darker red, that sort of thing. So it's changing the sort of luma, I think, on this. If I keep changing it, yeah. So it's basically making it darker here. It's changing the black and white values. So that's one way you can change the sort of contrast of an image or a texture if you're using a texture. Another useful node you might have, you can press A and click, and this is the add. You can also search for the plus symbol or the word add. This is similar to the multiply, but it's going to add 2 textures together. So if you want to combine 2 textures, or you want to layer them differently, and multiply is just not giving you the results you want, you might want to use the add function as well. And this is where you can also layer up other nodes together. Equally, where there's an add, there's also a subtract. Don't press S and click, because you get your scalar parameter. You have to search for minus or subtract. Oh, whoops, subtract. There we go. This does the opposite, basically, and that's what the divide does as well. It does the opposite of the multiply. Okay. But for the most part, we're going to stick with the ones that we used with the concrete texture of just a texture sample, a texture coordinate, and a scalar node with a multiply node as well, maybe a color node as well. So this color node is called a constant 3 vector, because it's got an X, Y, and a Z value, or an R, G, and B value. And the other one we use is the constant value of just the basic constant singular numerical value. Okay, and that is how to create a basic material using textures or using the inbuilt color nodes or whatever. Next, we're going to work on texturing this blank landscape at the moment, so that we can finally bring everything together. And that's going to use some new nodes that we haven't looked at before.